We continue our series looking at better decisions, and I don't know about you, but I've made some interesting decisions in my life. I made a decision a couple of years ago, and I was working in an electronics store, and I thought, I've got a great problem, I've got a great solution. The problem was I hate mowing lawns. The solution was making a robotic lawnmower. So, and I worked with a few guys, and they were like, oh yeah, I think we can do it. And so we started designing this project that I was going to build. And I probably bit off a bit more than I could chew, because coming into it, I thought, oh yeah, I know roughly what I'm doing. I need a robot chassis, I need some GPS equipment, I need some, I don't know, I guess I needed a few different things in that regard, and had access to all the cheap components that I worked at my work. I guess what I had was a strong vision of what I wanted to do and what the end result was, but the getting there was something I overlooked, how difficult it was, and why aren't there more robotic lawnmowers mowing our lawns? Well, I guess because they're pretty difficult to make and expensive, I guess, also. For me, it wasn't so much the cost, more I actually underestimated my own skills in that space and the time I had to learn the skills, because I wanted it to be a learning journey, learning how to build this thing as I went, but discovered they didn't have the time and probably the focus needed to actually finish that thing. So 3 or 4 years down the track now, I have an unfinished lawnmower sitting in my office, just waiting to be finished. I don't think I'll finish it. I might turn it into something else. But it wasn't my best decision doing that. Now, I could have, perhaps if I'd stopped at the start and thought, do I have enough focus? Do I have enough aptitude to learn how to do this? Am I an electronics engineer or a mechatronics engineer? No, Andrew, you're not. Maybe you should look at something else. I didn't do that and spent a little bit of money, not heaps, and a lot of time in that space. The question that leads us to the question we're looking at this week. And that question is, am I being honest with myself? This is a great question to ask when we're making decisions, because often we've got goals and we've got a focus. We call it, well, it's called focalism, when we fixate on one thing, and then everything else, we sort of get tunnel vision on it, and everything else sort of drifts off, and we don't see all the other things around the issue. So I sort of got tunnel vision on this project that I wanted to do to solve this problem that I really wanted to solve. I absolutely hate mowing the lawn. It's one of my most unfavourite chores around the house. But somehow I just didn't consider these other things that may have got in the way of getting the project done. So if I'd stopped and said, am I being honest with myself, really? Now sometimes we need to stop and look at ourselves in the mirror and ask that question. Am I really being honest with myself? I might not have launched into that great project that I had. Perhaps you've got some decisions in your life where you thought, why did I decide to do that? Why did I decide to buy that? It's a couple of weeks into the semester now. Maybe you're thinking, why did I choose to study this? Why am I studying this subject? Really? Why did I choose that? What was I thinking? Jesus says this in John chapter 8, verse 32. He says, and you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Because Jesus is referring to himself here, first and foremost. Knowing Jesus and who he is will set us free. But this truth, I think, can be applied into many areas of our life, including making decisions. If I'd known the truth about my own abilities and resources, the time and the energy and money I had, then perhaps it would have saved me from launching into that project that is now sitting unfinished. If we are more truthful with ourselves and about our own motives and emotions, I think it can help us stop making decisions which perhaps we will later regret. Perhaps it's avoiding a conflict with someone you work with or someone you study with. Perhaps it's avoiding an awkward conversation with your parents. Or perhaps it's a decision you have to make about a relationship or a potential relationship. Whatever decision you're facing, asking this question helps us to delve behind what we are actually selling ourselves. And I talked about that last week, that we are our own worst salespeople or our best salespeople. We can convince ourselves of just about anything if we're given the right goals, if we're given the right situation. And so asking this question helps us to take a step back and ask, are we really being honest? Are we really telling ourselves the whole truth about this decision that we need to make? Now, we're just going to have a little discussion around your tables. I think I've got the question on the screen there. Why did you buy that thing? So this is a great question. Now, you don't need to tell people what the thing is you bought. I'm sure we've all had something we bought and later regretted. But just have a bit of a discussion around your table. Why did you buy it? Or why would someone buy something that they would later regret? And we'll come back in a couple of minutes. I think for each of us, it's a different thing. Now we had a bit of conversation around our table that not everyone was great at buying things, or not everyone regretted a lot of the decisions they had to buy. And I guess that's my experience in some ways. I shared that last week, that I'm not a very good impulse buyer, but for some of us that's probably more of a struggle. However, in the big scheme of things, I think there's many common reasons why we make decisions that we later regret. And we're going to share, and we're going to look at the Bible and just see a story of one person that made a really regrettable decision. And I guess the reason he made his decision will become obvious. But we're looking at a person called Rehoboam. And Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. So we might be familiar with King David in the Bible. His son was Solomon. And Solomon's son was Rehoboam. And Rehoboam inherited the rule of Israel, the nation. And Solomon was described as the richest, wisest, most powerful king that Israel had. Now we don't really think too much about Rehoboam, the guy that came after Solomon. And we're going to find out why that is. So we're going to read from 1 Kings 12. Rehoboam went to Shechem, where all Israel had gathered to make him king. When Jeroboam son of Nebat heard of this, he returned to Egypt, for he had fled to Egypt to escape from King Solomon. The leaders of Israel summoned him and Jeroboam, and the whole assembly of Israel went to speak to Rehoboam. Your father was a hard master, they said. Lighten the harsh labour demands and heavy taxes that your father imposed on us, then we will be your loyal subjects. Rehoboam replied, give me 3 days to think this over. Then come back for my answer. So the people went away. Now this all seems pretty good to start with. He's going to be made king, and he meets with all the northern tribes of Israel, and they have some questions about what he's going to do in the future. I mean, we just had the election yesterday. People would have had questions about the political parties and what they're going to do if they were elected. So there's been a whole election campaign, and the parties are saying, well, this is what we're going to do if we're going to be elected. This is a little bit similar to that. If you're going to be king, what are you going to be like? And we'll vote you in king once we know what you're going to be like. And I guess Rehoboam makes a pretty good statement here, doesn't he? He says, I'm going to go away and think about it for 3 days. I'm not going to just rush into this. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to get some advice. That's a really good way to start making a decision. He gets a reasonable request, and he goes away to think about it. Very good. Now, it doesn't keep going so well. It says, then King Rehoboam discussed the matter with the older men who had counselled his father, Solomon. What is your advice, he asked. How should I answer these people? The older counsellors replied, if you're willing to be a servant to these people today and give them a favourable answer, they will always be your loyal subjects. But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the older men and instead asked the opinion of the younger men who had grown up with him and were now his advisors. What is your advice? He asked them. How should I answer these people who want me to lighten the burdens imposed by my father? Well, the young man replied, "This is what you should tell those complainers who want a lighter burden. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Yes, my father laid heavy burdens on you, but I'm going to make them even heavier. My father beat you with whips, but I'll beat you with scorpions." That's not great advice, perhaps. So Rehoboam goes to the right places to make this decision. He goes to his advisors. So he does some things right. We'll give him credit there. He goes to Solomon's advisors, that were his father's advisors, and then he goes to his own peers. Both good options, actually. Neither of those are terrible options. The question is, why does he reject Solomon's advisors? Why does he reject the old people that had been wisely counselling his father? I mean, his father was was the richest and wisest king Israel ever had. Why did he reject those people? Unfortunately, Scripture doesn't really tell us why. But there's a few clues that we can gather. And if we dig a little bit deeper, we will see some of those things. So, I think that Solomon's advisors probably knew something that Rehoboam couldn't see. That's probably what I would say. They knew something that Rehoboam couldn't see. And I think we see in the next slide on the screen there. Oh yeah, you might not be able to see that, but I've bolded the second verse that we read just earlier. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard of this, he returned to Egypt, for he had fled to Egypt to escape King Solomon. So you got Rehoboam the king. Jeroboam was I guess like a labouring force, that he was in charge of some labour force doing some work. He'd been given a prophecy earlier on that he would be ruler of 10 tribes of Israel. Not only that, but there's also a couple of, people who were political exiles, Hadadezer and Rezon, and they had fled to neighbouring countries. And even though they had come back onto the scene when Solomon was around, even Solomon, with his vast army and wealth and riches, couldn't get rid of them. And so there was a number of political enemies that were sort of circling around the nation of Israel, including Jeroboam. And not only that, the problem with Solomon's reign was he might have been the richest, wisest, but in the end, the Bible tells us that he led Israel astray with his worship of many foreign gods. He had married so many women, and women not just from Israel, but from all the nations around Israel, and he'd started worshipping the gods of those nations as well, and set up idols to worship them. And so there was a lot of religious fracturing that was happening in Israel at the time, due to Solomon's rule. So the country of Israel was not in as good a position as what it had been in the past. And I think that Solomon's advisors knew that. And I think that's why they cautioned Rehoboam. What does Rehoboam see? Well, he sees the advice of his peers. He wants to be greater than his father. He wants to go further, he wants to be bigger, he wants to be more powerful, he wants to be stronger. And so he chooses the advice of his peers. Now, I think if Rehoboam had stopped a moment and just thought, hang on, I'm really being honest with myself. Could I really be more powerful than Solomon was at the height of his power? Given where Israel's at the moment, given what Solomon's done to the kingdom of Israel in the latter years of his life, could I really be greater than that? I think if he had stopped, he would have seen where Israel was at. If he'd stopped and been honest with himself, and asked the question, am I really being honest? Am I really that good? Am I really more powerful than what Solomon was? Do I really have the skills needed for this project? Do I have the money to buy that thing? Am I really being honest with myself? We are our best own salesman, I think. I love that term. Because I think it says a lot about how we can sell ourselves on things that aren't good for us, that aren't as good for us as what we really think they are. And I think that's what Rehoboam did. He sold himself on an idea that he could be more powerful and that he was more powerful than his dad ever was. And so he just disregarded the advice that didn't fit into that framework, that truth. The truth was right there in front of him. It had even been given to him. Yet he still rejected it because he had he had a fixation on an idea that really took him away. Jeremiah says a really interesting thing. He says this, he was a prophet to a king, to a number of kings later on down the track, and he says, the human heart is the most deceitful of all things, and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? Well, Jeremiah had seen a bunch of kings do some amazingly terrible things. And I guess part of what he writes here comes out of seeing people make bad decisions in their life. The human heart is the most deceitful of things. Now, deceitful isn't just being dishonest. So I think if we just straight up told ourselves lies, we would probably catch ourselves. But being deceitful is a little bit not the same. It's actually mixing some half-truth. Maybe a little bit of truth, there's a grain of truth in there, but mixing a little bit of half-truth, some untruth in there, things that aren't true, mixing it all together in a concoction that we swallow quite easily. I think of it a bit like manipulation. You know, we do that to ourselves. And Jeremiah definitely hits the mark there when it comes to how sometimes we can just work ourselves into making decisions that aren't great for us. And we look back and are like, why did we do that? We have no idea. Yet if we can stop ourselves and actually ask the question, are we being honest? Then maybe, just maybe, we might make some better decisions and have fewer regrets. So the question is, what can we do about that? What can we do about our hearts that are broken, as Jeremiah puts it, deceitful, desperately wicked? They're pretty stark words. What can we do about that? Well, ultimately, we can't fix that till we get to heaven, till we're in heaven and we're with Jesus. So I guess step one is admit it. Admit to yourself, do you know what? I'm often not making great decisions. My heart often wants things that aren't good for me. And it can sell me on things that I actually don't want. By our heart, I guess I'm talking about our emotions, our response to who we think we are, what we want to be. We actually need to admit that. Admit that we can sell ourselves on things that aren't good for us. So that's step one, to admit it. That we are broken, that we often don't get it right when it comes to making decisions in the moment. I guess step two would be looking at having community around us. So, I mean, Jeroboam did some things right, didn't he? He had some community around him. It didn't help him in the end because he still was fixated on that idea of being greater than his dad Solomon and King Solomon. And so we still need to stop and ask the question, are we being honest? But having community helps. I mean, he had the truth spoken to him by someone else. That was actually really helpful. And so I think that's one of the best things we can do in our lives, you can do in your lives, is surround yourself with people that will speak truth. Not just someone that will agree with you, but someone will ask you a question, but hang on, Andrew, really? That's the decision you want to make? I was telling my table that I was sitting at, talking about buying things, and I was talking about this lawnmower project. It's a bit of a failure. And I said to them, you know, because last week I told Jewel that I'm not great at making spur-of-the-moment decisions when it comes to shopping. Well, the bad decision in that project was on Marketplace, and I saw electric wheelchair up for grabs. Now, that was the perfect thing to build the lawnmower on. But you know what came up? It wasn't just one wheelchair, there was 2 wheelchairs that came up. 2! And not only that, but the price was like a quarter of the cost of one wheelchair. And I was getting 2 wheelchairs for that price. So I jumped at it. So now I have 2 wheelchairs sitting at home that I can't get rid of. That was a really good deal at the time. But, you know, we talk ourselves into things, don't we? If I had just stopped and thought, and my wife said to me afterwards, you bought a wheelchair? No, I bought 2 wheelchairs. Sorry, it's now sitting in the garage next to the car. And Facebook won't let me sell it, so I can't chuck it up on there. I tried to put photos up on there and they keep blocking me, but Gumtree's not much help either. But anyway, it's a great illustration of a decision that we look back on and think, why did we do that? Why did I make that decision? If only I had my wife there at the time. That was a spur-of-the-moment decision. If she'd been there, she'd be like, you don't need 2, you just need 1. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I shouldn't get that. having community around us is really helpful for making decisions, especially when we're fixated on something. When we're fixated on an idea. In the idea of who we think we are, whatever that decision could be. Having community around us, around you, that can speak the truth into your life, I think is an important step. So first we need to admit that we're broken. And then I think we need to gather community around us if we want to get better at making decisions. And thirdly, I think we need to pursue ruthlessly the truth. The truth about what we're feeling, the truth about what we really want, the truth about the decisions that we're making. Ruthlessly pursue that. Don't just settle for the, oh yeah, this seems really good. No, actually ask yourself and stop. Am I actually telling myself the truth about this? As I was thinking about making decisions, there's so many reasons why we make decisions. But I think often a lot of it comes back to who do we think we are? It comes back to our insecurity of what others will think about us. And then I guess it comes back to power or money, ultimately. A lot of our decisions can trace back to some of those things. Or even anxiety about why we make decisions that we think are going to make us feel better. But in the long term, they don't provide the happiness that we're really chasing. I just want to say also, before we finish, I'm going to wrap up in just a minute. But when it comes to making better decisions, when it comes to ruthlessly pursuing the truth, I guess the first place we need to start is why we're here tonight. What do you believe about Jesus, really? What do you really believe about Jesus? And do you have questions about who he is? Because as I said at the start, Jesus says the truth will set you free when you know it. And so I encourage you, if you want to talk more about who Jesus is, I'd love to chat with you. Because I think that's one of the first steps. It's why many of you are gathered here tonight, is because you know who Jesus is and you believe in him. But if you would like to make a decision to follow Jesus, I encourage you to come and chat with me afterwards. I'd love to chat with you more about who Jesus is. Or chat to the person that brought you as well. So as we finish, at the very least, don't make Rehoboam's mistake. Don't think you're more powerful than you really are. Don't think you're better than you really are. If that's all you're getting away from tonight, I think that's a good place to start. Know your blind spots. Don't think you're better than you really are. But when it comes to making great decisions, I think pursuing truth ruthlessly in your life will pay dividends in better decisions. Surrounding yourself with community that can ask questions about your motives, that can ask questions about the big decisions. And because I think we've all got big decisions we need to make. I hope you've got some big decisions that you need to make coming up. Let's pray as we finish, and then I've got a couple more discussion questions that we can go through. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you so much that we can gather here tonight. Thank you that we can learn from Rehoboam's mistakes. Thank you that the Bible isn't just perfect stories of people following you, but it's messy stories of messy people who are living with you, and they make mistakes sometimes. And it just shows your grace to continue working through their lives and through our lives as well. We thank you that you don't require perfection, but you require progress, that we learn from our mistakes and become more like you. But I pray for each of us in this room that we'll get better at making decisions. And I pray for all those here who have big decisions coming up for their future, perhaps for study opportunities, job opportunities. Father, help us to make better decisions that would honour you, that would make us more like you, and that would be a shining light to those around us, those who study and work with and family. We can make decisions that honour and glorify you with our lives. Thank you for your empowering spirit that leads and guides us to do that. And I pray you continue to lead and guide us as we head out from here to make better decisions throughout our week. We pray this in your name. Amen. I think we've got some more discussion questions just on the screen. No, it's not there. Hang on. I do have some. I will pull them up in just a second. But the questions are, why do you think Rehoboam didn't see the truth, even though it was given to him? And the second question is, what does